There are a lot of things that you can do in SolidWorks sketching that are beyond just the normal tools. Let's take a look at a few of them. First of all, I want to rotate the view somewhat, and then I'm going to open a new sketch. So I'll click on the plane and open a new sketch. Notice how it automatically snaps normal to the view of the sketch. That's due to a setting, and we'll take a look at that now. That's under Tools, Options, Sketch, Auto Rotate View Normal to Sketch Plane on Sketch Creation and Sketch Edit. Some computers may have this already set up and some may not. So that's a good one to have turned on because it's in System Options, so it's not saved with the template. It's on a per computer basis. So we'll say OK on that. That's the first little tip. Here's another one. If you're drawing a straight line and you want to transition to a tangent arc, you could go down and find the tangent arc tool and draw with that. But there's an easier way. So we've just drawn a line. I'm going to click and hold, and I'm getting a line. Now I'm going to go back to the same point and pull out again. Okay, see, now I'm getting a tangent arc. And I can make it go this way. There I'm getting reverse tangent. So that's the tangent arc. And you can go back to sketching and just get another tangent line from that. So line, tangent arc, tangent line. Another way to do that would be to draw your line, and then as you're drawing your arc or drawing the next sketch element, you just press A on the keyboard and it automatically converts to a tangent arc. And you can hit A again and it'll go back to a line. Okay, so that's just using the A hotkey to go back and forth between tangent line and tangent arc. Let's take a look at some of these other sketch tools that we haven't looked at before. The spline we can take a look at. The regular spline, you just click points that are on the spline, and then you can control these points that are actually touching the spline. But there's another type of spline in here that's called the style spline, and with this you're clicking on points that are on the control polygon. So these are not directly connected to the spline. Okay, so these points will influence the shape of the spline, but they do not control it directly. They influence it indirectly. So this is a style spline, and the points directly on the spline are called just a regular spline. Also, your normal spline, you can right click it, and there's an option that's off the screen right now that says display control polygon, and it allows you to see the same sort of thing. So even if you're using just a regular spline, you can still use the control polygon similar to what's available on the style spline. And with your style spline, likewise, you can use the option that's called convert to spline, and it will be, the conversion will cause an approximation, and this adds several spline points. It may add more points than you want, so you can go through and delete some spline points if you want to do that. So really, the spline and the style spline are just the same exact type of sketch element. They just use different types of controls. Let's take a look at some other sketch elements. We've got the polygon, and in the property manager you set how many sides you want the polygon to have, and click the center, drag out the included radius. Now you could change that from an inscribed circle to a circumscribed circle if the entire item is selected, you could also change the number of sides on it. Okay, so change from 6 to 8 to 3. All right, so that's the type of control that you've got with this. The are not going to be remembered like a dimension would be. You can apply a diameter dimension on the circle. If you want to go back and edit the polygon, you can right click on an element of it and edit polygon. That brings you back to the property manager for the polygon, escape out of the property manager, and one of the relationships that's on the polygon is the patterned relationship that you can see here. So that's automatically controlled by the polygon sketch type. Okay, now we're going to hit Control A on the keyboard to select everything and delete. Let's talk about some of the slots. We haven't talked about these yet. Straight slot, you click the endpoint of the center line and click the other endpoint of the center line and then drag the radius of the slot itself. Okay, so the center point straight slot is click the midpoint of the line and then click the center point of one end and click the radius. These are all pretty simple to use. 3-point arc slot, you create a 3-point arc and then you drag the radius of the slot. And finally, the center point arc slot is you click the center of the arc, click the two endpoints of the arc, and then drag the width of the slot. So that's fairly simple to use. Some other tools are the sketch text. This is an important one. First, we'll empty the curve selection up here, and maybe we just want to use this line, and we're going to put some sketch text in here. So I'll say put some sketch text in here. Okay, now you can tell SolidWorks to fill the entire selected line, and that's this fully justify. We can turn off the use document font and change the scale here. Flip the text to the other side of the line. You can make it go backwards or forwards. You could make it bold. You'll have to select the text and then make it bold. And you can also change the font to any other Windows font that you have installed on your computer. This text can now be used to extrude solid geometry. Get rid of the bold that's on here and say OK. Now you can later, if you need to, come back and edit this text. So you get it highlighted, double click, and it'll come right back up in the window. Also, and this would be an extreme measure, but you can right click on it and it's off the screen. Let's try to get it on the screen here. Right click and dissolve sketch text. This turns the sketch text into lines and arcs and splines as well. So this is kind of an extreme measure, but if you need to edit text, if you need to edit the sketch text, this is one way to do it. Again, once you've done this, you can't go back. So aside from using undo, so I can do Control Z and get the sketch text back. But if you've edited the text as a sketch, you're not going to be able to change it as text again. Okay. Let's talk about some settings that you can use in sketches. Tools, options, sketch. We've talked about the auto rotate view. That's when you start a new sketch. You're always looking square onto the sketch rather than looking at it in some angle. Use fully defined sketches. We normally turn this off. It's off by default. It will require you to fully define every sketch before you can make a feature from it. That's a little bit severe. Some people like to enforce that. I think it's a little overboard to try to use something like that in a production setting. You might try to use it in training or something, but I would avoid it in production. Display arc center points in part and assembly sketches. So this can be useful. Some people like to see that. I definitely do. So if you have an arc, say a 3-point arc, the arc center point is going to show up here, and that's a point that you can put relations to, dimensions to it, and other things. So you can drag it as well. It's a type of thing that you want to have access to. Some people consider it to be clutter on the screen, and they don't want to have that. So SolidWorks gives you the option to turn it on or off. Display entity points in part and assembly sketches. Okay, what this is talking about is all of these endpoints. If you draw a line or an arc, SolidWorks specifically identifies the endpoints. If we turn this setting off, and say OK, then your sketches only show endpoints if you actually go over the endpoint. Some people consider this to be cleaner and more desirable for that reason, and I personally like to see the endpoints because seeing those endpoints gives you information such as, is it fully defined or underdefined or overdefined, this sort of thing. The setting prompt to close sketch does the following. Let's say we have a solid part here, and we have a sketch that's open, and it's open in the sense of being an open contour, so it doesn't enclose an area. If I take this sketch and try to extrude it, SolidWorks is going to prompt me to close the sketch with model edges. So if I say yes, SolidWorks is going to use these two open edges to close the loop. And I can say yes, and it makes this type of solid. If I were to say no on that, let's Control Z because it added in those two sketch elements. I'm going to select this and go to extrude it, and I just say no here, then I'm going to get a thin feature because it's an open profile. So that's one of the options that you can use if you're going to use model edges to close a sketch. I could use this a little bit differently too. Let's create a different sketch. So I'll open a new sketch on here, and let's just do some sort of random 3-point arc and go across like this. So we've got an arc that touches on both sides, but it doesn't follow the model edges at any point. If I extrude this now with that setting turned on, it allows me to close the sketch with these edges, or I could reverse that and close it with sketches in the other direction. And I can say yes, and you can see here that it is actually added 1, 2, 3 additional lines. So that's an interesting setting that can save you a little bit of time in certain situations. Another sketch setting, Tools, Options, Sketch. Create sketch on new part. That's if you have As soon as you create a new part, it opens up a new sketch and makes that active. Override dimensions on drag. I recommend that you don't use this because this one can be kind of dangerous. If you, let's say you have a rectangle, and let's put it on this plane, and you've got these two dimensions on here. So everything's fully defined. It says here it's fully defined. If I get out of the dimension tool with escape, try to drag this, it's not going to drag. All right. Now if you go back and you use that setting, tools, options, sketch, override dims on drag. Now if I try to drag, it allows me to drag a fully defined sketch. Okay, and these dimensions are changing to match the drag. That's a very interesting setting. Sometimes it can be useful and helpful, but usually it's just going to confuse people. You might use it as a fun prank on April Fool's Day, and other than that, I'd leave it off. Display plane when shaded. I can turn that on, say okay. All right, so now my plane, this plane is, because I'm in a sketch, it's showing the plane is shaded. Get out of the sketch. If I show the plane, then the plane is also being shaded. But if I say I open a sketch, open a new sketch on this face, it first rotates me so I'm normal to that plane, but it's also shading the sketch plane so I know where I'm sketching. This is sometimes used in conjunction with the grid, and the grid can be turned on from the hide show menu, and you can turn the grid on. The grid only shows when you're in a sketch, and I found that using this in training is very often helpful because students sometimes have the tendency to forget whether they're in or out of a sketch, and they'll say, well, why can't I make a fillet now? And the answer is because you're in a sketch. And if the sketch plane is shaded and the grid is turned on, you're much less likely to forget whether you're in or out of a sketch. So let's turn those back off just to revisit. The heads-up view toolbar, the hide show menu, turn off the view grid, and the other setting is tools options, sketch, display plane when shaded. There are a lot of other settings in here, but some of these will be in the text, and some of these you should just work through on your own. In particular, ghost image on drag. This helps you when you're editing a sketch to see where the sketch originally was before you started. Scale sketch on first dimension creation. This is a recent addition in the software. Very helpful tool. I think this is a great one to use. And how do you handle over-defining dimensions? Do you prompt to set driven state, or do you set driven by default, or what is it that happens? How does SolidWorks handle it when you over-define the sketch? Most of these settings that I'm using are the default settings, and in general, the defaults are pretty good, but you should evaluate each setting on your own to make sure that you're getting the best use of the software.